The weight of a legacy is measured not in gold, but in ghosts. For Silas Thorne at 72, the ghosts were shareholders in a mining company that no longer existed. Starlight Mining, a name that was supposed to evoke hope and discovery, but now only echoed with the final, frantic transmissions from a collapsed shaft in West Virginia. A disaster his aggressive cost-cutting measures had made inevitable. He'd paid the fines, settled the lawsuits, and funded the memorials. But the 14 ghosts remained on his board, their silent judgment a constant, crushing presence in his sterile Fifth Avenue penthouse. He commanded Thorne Industries, a behemoth with tentacles in logistics, technology, and private equity. But he couldn't command the tremor in his own hand when he read the morning paper and saw a face that reminded him of one of the fallen miners. He was a king of a vast, lonely empire, insulated by layers of wealth and yes men who polished his reality until it gleamed with falsehood. Tonight was his penance, his pilgrimage into the world he had broken and then abandoned. He shed the skin of Silas Thorne and became Sam, a retired high school history teacher from Buffalo, a widower living on a meager pension. The clothes were a masterpiece of curated anonymity, sourced from a Salvation Army in Queens. A tweed jacket with leather elbow patches worn to a glossy smoothness, a slightly too large beige turtleneck, and pleated corduroy trousers that sighed with every step. A pair of scuffed loafers and a pair of thick bifocal glasses he didn't need completed the illusion. In the reflection of a grimy bodega window, he saw a man the world had forgotten, a man whose opinion was worthless, whose presence was an inconvenience. The invisibility was a sacrament. His destination was the Aurelian, a temple of modern gastronomy in Tribeca. He owned the building it was in, a fact known only to his chief of security and a handful of lawyers. The restaurant itself was a tenant, but one that represented the pinnacle of the world he now loathed. A place where a single plate of food cost more than a family's weekly groceries, a place built on the illusion of worth. The reports from his security chief, Adrian, a man whose loyalty was as severe and unadorned as his Savile Row suits, described the Aurelian as a flawless operation. Its manager, a man named Marcus Vane, was a rising star in the culinary world, lauded for his impeccable taste and ruthless efficiency. But reports were sterile things, devoid of soul. Silas wanted to feel the soul of this place, or confirm its absence, through the eyes of a man who didn't matter. He pushed through the heavy, smoked glass door, and the cacophony of the city was instantly replaced by the hushed, curated hum of wealth. The air smelled of truffle oil, beeswax, and the faintest, sharpest note of ambition. A hostess, a young woman whose severe black dress and architectural haircut made her look more like a gallery curator, scanned his attire with an almost imperceptible flinch. "May I help you?" Her voice was a low, cool melody, designed to be both welcoming and dismissive. "Table for one," Silas rasped, pitching his voice a little higher, adding a slight, wheezing quality he imagined came with decades of chalk dust. She tapped a stylus on her tablet, her lips pursed. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" "No, just in town for the night. Thought I'd try it." "We are typically booked months in advance," she said, the silent, "for people like us, not people like you," hanging in the air. "However, I believe we have a small table available near the service corridor." It was the classic exile, a table for the undesirable. "That would be lovely," Silas said, the feigned gratitude tasting like ash in his mouth. He followed her through the main dining room, a cavern of dark wood, muted lighting, and whispered conversations. He felt the glances of the other diners, brief and sharp as insect stings. They saw the shabby jacket, the ill-fitting trousers, and dismissed him. In their world, a man's value was stitched into the label of his suit. A bitter, familiar anger tightened his chest. This was the system he had perfected, a world that judged the book by its cover because it was too lazy to read the pages. He was seated at a tiny table, barely large enough for a plate and a glass, tucked into an alcove beside a door that swung open every 30 seconds, revealing a blinding slash of fluorescent light and the clang and shout of the kitchen. It was the worst seat in the house. It was perfect. From his shabby throne, he observed the theater. He saw the waiters, moving with the lithe, predatory grace of dancers, their smiles adjusted based on the vintage of wine ordered. He saw the manager, Marcus Vane, gliding between tables. Vane was exactly as his file described him. Tall, impeccably dressed in a custom suit, with a mane of silver hair, and a smile that was both charming and predatory. He exuded an aura of effortless control, one hand casually in his pocket while the other gestured, punctuating a story for a table of laughing investment bankers. But when he turned, passing a busboy, the smile vanished, replaced by a momentary snarl of cold fury as he noticed a single water spot on a fork the boy was carrying. He didn't speak, but his look made the young man recoil as if struck. Silas settled in, letting the rhythm of the restaurant wash over him. He was a ghost at the feast, and from his purgatorial table, he could finally see the truth. The flawless operation was a machine, yes, but one lubricated by fear. He saw the subtle transactions of power, the calculated kindness that was just business in a friendlier uniform. It was exactly as he'd expected. Profitable, beautiful, and utterly devoid of warmth. He'd been nursing a glass of tap water for nearly 15 minutes when a server approached. She moved differently from the others. Where they glided with practiced confidence, she moved with a quiet, focused efficiency, as if conserving every ounce of energy. She was young, maybe 21 or 22, with large, startlingly blue eyes that seemed to absorb everything. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a simple, tight braid that emphasized the weary lines around her mouth. Her uniform was crisp, but the cuffs of her white shirt were frayed, a detail Silas, a man obsessed with details, noticed immediately. "Good evening, sir," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried a surprising resonance. "My name is Ellie. I'll be your server tonight. Can I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" He looked at her name tag. Ilara Ellie. It was a name that felt both old-fashioned and strong. He deliberately ordered the cheapest glass of red wine on the list, a simple Côte du Rhône. He watched her for the flicker of disdain, the subtle tightening of the lips that would betray her disappointment at a small check and an even smaller tip. He saw none. "Of course," she said, her expression open and pleasant. "It's a very nice choice, one of my favorites." As she walked away, he noticed her shoes, standard issue black flats, but the leather was cracked across the top and the soles were worn thin, curling away from the edges. They were the shoes of someone who walked miles every day on unforgiving floors, the shoes of someone for whom a new $70 pair was a significant, perhaps impossible, expense. That small, worn-out detail told Silas more about the true state of his city than all of Adrian's meticulously compiled economic forecasts. For the first time all night, Silas Thorne felt a flicker of something other than self-loathing and cynicism. It was curiosity. Who was this young woman with the old eyes and the worn-out shoes who looked at a forgotten old man and saw a person worthy of a genuine smile? He didn't know it yet, but his simple, melancholy test was about to intersect with a crime of breathtaking audacity. And Ilara, the quiet server, was the only person in the entire city who held the key, not because of what she knew, but because of how she saw. Ilara Ellie Vance lived a life measured in millimeters and seconds. By day, she measured the microscopic tolerances of escapement wheels and the gentle curve of a Breguet spring. By night, she measured the time between tables, the ounces in a wine pour, the dwindling balance in her bank account. Her world was a universe of tiny, crucial details. Her grandfather, Arthur, was the architect of that universe. For 50 years, he had been a master watchmaker. His small shop in the East Village, a dusty sanctuary of ticking clocks and intricate machinery. His hands, now knotted with arthritis and plagued by the tremors of Parkinson's, had once assembled movements so complex they seemed to operate on magic. He had taught her everything, not just how to clean a jewel or set a balance staff, but how to see. "Look closer, Ilara," he would say, his voice a gentle rasp, his loupe pressed to his eye. "The world is full of lazy copies. A true master leaves a signature, not in his name, but in the perfection of the work. The curve of a serif on a dial, the polish on a screw head no one will ever see. the watermark on the paper of the certificate. The forgery always fails in the details. Now his world of details was fading. Dementia was stealing his memories, leaving him stranded in confusing pockets of the past. The shop was long gone, sold to pay for the first few years of his care. Now his care was a crushing mountain of debt that Ellie chipped away at with every shift at the Aurelian. The job paid well. The tips from the wealthy clientele were the only thing keeping them afloat, but it came at a cost to her soul. Her manager, Marcus Vane, was a man who understood the surface of luxury, but nothing of its substance. He was a bully in a bespoke suit. He'd noticed her quiet nature and her desperation and had targeted her. He would change her schedule without notice, lose her record of cash tips, and assign her the most difficult customers, all with a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He kept her constantly off balance, constantly afraid of losing the job that was her grandfather's lifeline. She'd also noticed his secrets, the late-night meetings in the restaurant after it had closed, the men in dark suits who never ate, but who would go with Vane into the restaurant's famous, climate-controlled wine cellar and emerge 20 minutes later with discreet briefcases. She'd once seen Vane handling a bottle of wine with a strange, delicate tool she didn't recognize, his movements furtive and quick. She knew something was wrong, but in a world of power and money, what could a waitress with worn-out shoes possibly do? When she first saw the old man at table 14, the worst table in the house, she felt a pang of protective empathy. He looked like so many of her grandfather's old friends, men who had built things with their hands and were now adrift in a digital world that had no use for them. She watched the hostess seat him with thinly veiled contempt and knew that the other servers would ignore him, focusing on the bigger payouts. Ellie wasn't wired that way. She gave him the same warm, genuine service she gave the hedge fund manager at table 2. When he ordered the cheap wine, she endorsed his choice sincerely. As she moved through her duties, she kept an eye on him. He wasn't like other single diners who buried themselves in their phones. He was watching the room, his gaze missing nothing, his expression a mixture of sadness and fierce intelligence. He looked less like a lost old man and more like a scholar studying a forgotten, tragic text. When she returned to take his dinner order, she braced herself for a frugal choice. "Have you decided, sir?" He looked up from the heavy leather-bound menu, his eyes magnified slightly by the thick lenses. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet. "I believe I will have the sea bass. And, to celebrate a small, personal victory, a bottle of the Chateau Margaux, the 1982. Ellie's pen froze an inch above her notepad. Her professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The 1982 Chateau Margaux. It wasn't just a bottle of wine, it was a legend. It was a unicorn. The restaurant had exactly one bottle, stored in a temperature and humidity-controlled display case within the main cellar. Its price on the menu was a staggering $24,000. This was an order so far beyond the realm of possibility for the man sitting before her that it felt like a hallucination. Her mind raced through the scenarios. Was he senile? Was this a cruel prank? A dare? Vane would crucify her if this man couldn't pay. The protocol was clear. For an order of that magnitude, the sommelier and the manager had to be summoned. The customer would be politely asked for a credit card to be held. It was a process designed to gently, but firmly, weed out the dreamers from the truly wealthy. That's what she was supposed to do. But then she looked at him again. She saw the quiet dignity in his posture, the sharp intelligence in his eyes. There was no confusion there, no hint of a prank. He was watching her, waiting for her reaction. It felt like a test. A test of what? She wasn't sure. Judgment? Protocol? Character? In that instant, Ellie made a choice. She would not humiliate this man. She would afford him the same trust and respect she would a king. She would bet her job on the quiet truth she saw in his eyes. A small, genuine smile returned to her lips. "An absolutely magnificent choice, sir," she said, her voice betraying none of the hurricane of fear in her chest. "I will inform our sommelier. He will want to decant it for you personally." "Thank you, Elara," he said, his eyes holding hers for a moment. "I would appreciate that." She walked away, her legs feeling like lead. She could feel Vane's eyes on her from across the room, a palpable, physical pressure. She knew the moment she entered the order into the point-of-sale system, alarms would go off. It was designed to flag extraordinary orders for managerial approval. Vane would be at her side in seconds. She took a deep breath, typed in the order, and hit send. The system blinked red. Before she could take 2 steps, Vane was there, his hand gripping her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Vance!" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper as he pulled her into the alcove. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? Table 14 just ordered the 82 Margot." "Yes, Mr. Vane." He seemed quite certain. "Are you an idiot?" His face was inches from hers, his breath smelling of stale espresso and rage. "Look at him. He probably thinks it cost $24. Did you get a card? Did you follow protocol?" "He seemed legitimate, sir," she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't want to insult a guest." "Insult a guest?" Vane's laugh was a short, ugly bark. "He's a broke old man wasting our time. When he bolts on that check, that $24,000 is your problem. I will own you. I will garnish your wages for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" The threat was explicit, the malice in his eyes absolute. The fear was a cold, metallic taste in her mouth. Her grandfather's care, their apartment, everything was balanced on this single insane moment. But as she looked past Vane's contorted face, she saw the old man at table 14. He was watching them. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read the scene perfectly. Vane's aggression, her terror, and he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of solidarity, a silent message. "I see you. I understand." A strange, defiant courage flooded through her. He knew. He saw. And she had made a promise to him, an unspoken one, to treat him with dignity. She would not back down. "I understand, Mr. Vane," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I will take full responsibility." Vane stared at her, stunned by her defiance. He let go of her arm, his eyes narrowing. "Fine," he sneered. "This is your funeral." He stalked away toward the wine cellar, no doubt to oversee the transaction himself. Ellie took a shaky breath. She had just wagered her entire world on the quiet integrity of a stranger. As she watched Vane unlock the cellar, she knew she had to see this through. She needed to retrieve fresh linens from the service closet next to the cellar. It was the perfect excuse. She followed him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A rhythm that was about to beat in time with the discovery of a secret far more valuable and far more dangerous than a single bottle of wine. The wine cellar was Vane's kingdom, a hushed, chilled cathedral of glass and dark wood, where bottles worth more than cars slept in their custom-built cradles. A thick, soundproof door separated it from the bustling service corridor. As Ellie approached the linen closet, she saw Vane inside the cellar with the restaurant's sommelier. The old man's order had clearly rattled him, and he was overseeing the retrieval of the legendary bottle himself. The sommelier, a fussy, meticulous man named Jean-Pierre, was cradling the bottle of 1982 Chateau Margaux as if it were a newborn infant. Vane, however, was impatient. He gestured dismissively, taking the bottle himself. Ellie lingered by the closet, folding napkins, her senses on high alert. The heavy cellar door hadn't latched properly. It was ajar by a mere fraction of an inch. Through the gap, she had a narrow, perfect view of Vane's hands. He placed the bottle on a small marble countertop under a bright, focused halogen light. "Just get the decanting set ready, Jean-Pierre," Vane said, his tone sharp. "I will handle the initial presentation." The sommelier, looking slightly offended, retreated deeper into the cellar to fetch the crystal decanter. Vane was now alone with the bottle, and he did something strange. With a furtive glance toward the door, he pulled a small, pen-like tool from his jacket pocket. It had a tiny angled mirror at its tip, like a dentist's tool. He angled it toward the bottom of the bottle's label, where the paper met the glass. He wasn't admiring it. He was inspecting it. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his lips a thin, tight line. Then his other hand retrieved a second tool, a thin, flexible blade, almost like a watchmaker's palette knife. He slid it with practiced, minute precision under the corner of the label. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct, honed by years at her grandfather's workbench, screamed that this was wrong. You didn't do that to a priceless artifact. You didn't pry at it with tools in a cellar. Her mind flashed back to a lesson from her grandfather. They had been examining a supposedly rare Patek Philippe watch. Look, Arthur had whispered, pointing with his tweezers. The font on the date wheel, the serif on the one is too thick by 1/10 of a millimeter. And feel the paper of the certificate. No texture, no soul. A dead copy. They get the big picture right, Alara, but they always fail on the tiny details. Vane wasn't checking for authenticity. He seemed to be confirming something else. He worked for a moment longer, a look of profound relief washing over his face as he seemed to find what he was looking for. He withdrew the knife, smoothed the label corner down with his thumb, and slipped the tools back into his pocket just as Jean-Pierre returned. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. It was an act of covert, expert verification. But why? Why would he need to check the label of a bottle he supposedly knew was authentic? Unless he wasn't sure. Unless some of the bottles weren't real. The late-night meetings, the men with briefcases, it all clicked into place with a sickening thud. The Aurelian wasn't just a restaurant. It was a hub, a place for swapping the genuine for the fake. He wasn't just a manager, he was a criminal, using the restaurant's sterling reputation as the perfect cover for art forgery on a breathtaking scale. The wine bottles were the art. The old man's impossible order had forced his hand. It had called forth one of the key pieces in his collection, a piece Vane had to personally verify before it went under the microscope of a true connoisseur. Her mysterious guest hadn't just ordered a bottle of wine, he had unwittingly pulled the pin on a grenade, and she was standing right next to it. The wine was presented, decanted, and served with all the pomp and circumstance its price tag demanded. The old man, Sam, savored his first sip, his eyes closed in what seemed to be genuine appreciation. He nodded to her, a silent thank you that felt more profound than any spoken compliment. He ate his meal slowly, deliberately. He never once looked at his phone. He simply watched and thought. Ellie moved through the rest of her shift in a daze of terror and adrenaline. She knew what she had seen. Vane was a crook, a dangerous one. He was connected. The men in the suits were not people you crossed. But the old man, there was something about him, a stillness, an authority that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. He was her only hope. She had to tell him. She had to warn him. But how? She couldn't speak to him. Vane was watching her like a hawk now, his eyes filled with suspicion. A note. It had to be a note. In the cramped employee break room, her hands shaking, she tore a blank page from her order pad. What could she write? My boss is a criminal was too vague. The wine is a fake might not be true of this specific bottle. Vane had seemed relieved after all. Maybe this one was real, a showpiece to maintain the illusion. She had to give him a detail only a true expert would understand, a breadcrumb from her grandfather's world. Her pen hovered over the paper. She wrote with a hurried, cramped script, the Chateau Margaux, 82. He checked the watermark on the label with a palette knife before serving. Something is wrong in the cellar. He isn't selling wine. He is trading fakes. It was specific. It was technical. The words watermark and palette knife were the language of experts, of authenticators. It wasn't the rambling of a panicked waitress. It was a professional observation. She folded the note into a tiny, tight square and tucked it deep into her apron pocket, the sharp corners pressing into her thigh. Her shift ended. The man had paid his bill, in cash, a neat stack of $100 bills, the exact amount, including tax, $24,387.50. No tip. The strangeness of it was another signal. It was a transaction, not a meal. He was making a point. He was waiting. He sat there finishing a glass of water, his eyes on her. It was now or never. As she went to his table for the final clearing, her heart hammered against her ribs. Vane was at the host stand, his back to them. Was everything to your satisfaction, sir? She asked, her voice a strained whisper. It was an education, Alara. Thank you, he said. His gaze was intense, expectant. Her hands moved in a blur of practiced efficiency. As her right hand picked up his water glass, her left, shielded by her body, slid the folded note from her pocket and placed it on the table, instantly covering it with the small leather billfold that held his receipt. It was a perfect, seamless motion. She picked up the billfold, the note now hidden beneath it, and turned to walk away. Wait. The single word cut through the restaurant's low hum. Ellie froze, her blood turning to ice. He saw me take it back. He thinks I changed my mind. The billfold felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She had been too clever, too subtle. She turned slowly. His face was a mask of confusion and a flicker of deep disappointment. He had been waiting for the message, and he thought she'd lost her nerve. The weight of her failure was crushing. In a surge of pure, desperate courage, she walked back to the table. She could feel Vane's eyes on her now. His attention peaked. She couldn't speak. Without a word, she placed the billfold back on the table. Then she looked him directly in the eye, took a shallow breath, and gave the billfold a tiny, deliberate nudge with her finger, just enough to reveal the corner of the white note tucked beneath. "You forgot this," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Your receipt." It was a clumsy, nonsensical excuse, but the message was clear. She turned and walked away, her entire body trembling, not daring to look back. She had just handed a declaration of war to a complete stranger, and she could only pray he wasn't the enemy. Silas Thorne watched her walk away, a whirlwind of adrenaline and ice-cold clarity churning within him. He understood the fumbled ballet of the note perfectly. The delivery, the panicked retrieval, the final, desperate correction. "You forgot your receipt." The words were absurd, a flimsy cover for an act of incredible bravery. He waited a full minute, allowing the rhythms of the restaurant to resume their normal cadence. He glanced at the manager, Vane, who was now staring at his table with undisguised suspicion. The game was up. Silas casually placed his hand over the billfold, his fingers closing around it, feeling the small, hard square of the hidden note. He stood moving with the slow stiffness of the old man he was pretending to be, and gave Vane a brief, dismissive nod. Then he walked out into the cool embrace of the New York night. He didn't open the note immediately. He walked 2 blocks, the city lights smearing into abstract patterns around him, his heart pounding with a force he hadn't felt in decades. This was the feeling that had preceded every major acquisition, every hostile takeover. It was the feeling of imminent, seismic change. He ducked into the shadows of a brownstone stoop and finally unfolded the small piece of paper. The handwriting was tight, strained, but precise. The Chateau Margaux, 82. He checked the watermark on the label with a palette knife before serving. Something is wrong in the cellar. He isn't selling wine. He is trading fakes. Silas read it 3 times. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air crept down his spine. This was not a desperate plea for help. It was a piece of high-level intelligence. Watermark, palette knife. The specificity was stunning. It wasn't a guess. It was an eyewitness account from someone who understood the significance of what they were seeing. Trading fakes. It was a crime of immense sophistication, happening right under his nose, in his building. His melancholy experiment had inadvertently uncovered a rot that went far deeper than poor service or a manager's arrogance. The quiet waitress with the frayed cuffs and the encyclopedic knowledge of forgery techniques hadn't just served him a meal. She had handed him a conspiracy. He pulled out his burner phone, a simple, untraceable device, and dialed the only number in its memory. Adrian answered on the first ring. "Sir?" His voice was crisp, betraying no surprise at the late hour. "Adrian, it's me. I'm at a location 3 blocks south of the Aurelian. I'm sending you my coordinates. We have a situation." "Is your security compromised?" "My security is fine. The company's is not." Silas's voice was low and hard. He read the note aloud to Adrian, whose silence on the other end of the line was more eloquent than any words. Adrian was a man who dealt in threats. Physical, digital, financial. He understood the language of crime. "A palette knife," Adrian said finally, his voice tight with professional appreciation. "That's not an amateur's observation. Who is the source?" "A waitress. Her name is Alara Vance." A disgruntled employee setting up her boss? Adrian's skepticism was his default setting. No, Silas said with absolute certainty. I saw her. I saw her manager threaten her. I saw the fear in her eyes. She is terrified, and she still did this. She is either the bravest person I have ever met or the most foolish. I'm betting on brave. He thought of the Starlight miners, of the warnings he had dismissed as disgruntled chatter. He would not make that mistake again. I want everything you can find on Marcus Vane and Alara Vance. Financials, associates, histories, everything. Use our top contractors. I want it firewalled from all Thorn Industries servers. No internal trail. Consider it done, sir. What is our objective? Proof, Silas said. The note is an accusation. I need the evidence. I need to get inside that cellar. Sir, a physical breach is inadvisable. We can arrange a health inspection, a fire inspection. No, Silas interrupted. Vane is already suspicious of Sam, the old man who dropped $24,000 in cash and vanished. An official inspection will send him running, and the evidence will disappear. We need to do this quietly. Tonight. A long, weary sigh came through the phone. Sir, with respect, this is not a job for you. Let my team handle it. Your team doesn't know what they're looking for, Adrian. I do. This girl, Ilara, has armed me with 2 words, watermark and palette knife. That's the key. Besides, Silas added, a grim smile touching his lips, who would ever suspect a frail old history teacher of corporate espionage? There was a pause. I will dispatch a tactical team to a nearby staging point. Isabel will be leading. She is the best non-destructive entry specialist we have. I will also have a full dossier on both subjects for you within the hour. But sir, be careful. This feels different. I know, Silas said, looking back toward the distant glittering lights of the Aurelian. That's why I'm doing it myself. By 2 a.m., the preliminary reports were in, and they painted a stark, compelling picture. Marcus Vane was living a life his salary could never support. A condo in the clouds, a collection of sports cars, and ties to several holding companies with known links to Eastern European organized crime. He was not a simple embezzler. He was a high-level player. The file on Alara Vance was the opposite. It was a portrait of quiet desperation. Dropped out of Columbia's art history program to care for her ailing grandfather, a celebrated horologist named Arthur Vance. The medical bills were astronomical. She had no criminal record, no vices, just a mountain of debt and a single, all-consuming responsibility. The report included a note from the analyst. Her collegiate thesis proposal had been titled The Art of the Authenticator, Detecting Forgery in 17th Century Dutch Masters. She wasn't just brave, she was an expert. At 3 a.m., Silas, still dressed as Sam, met a woman named Isabel in the back of a blacked-out plumbing van. She was compact, muscular, with eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. She handed him a small earpiece and a set of janitorial overalls. Adrian says you're going in with me, she said, her voice a low murmur. His words, not mine. The plan is simple. The restaurant uses a third-party cleaning service. We have their uniforms and their access codes. We are the late shift. You will be my assistant. Your job is to mop the floor and look useless. My job is to bypass the cellar's internal security. What about Vane? Silas asked. He has a camera in his office linked to his phone, Isabel said, showing him a schematic on a tablet. But he has a blind spot, the cellar door itself. He can see who enters his office, but not the cellar across the hall. He relies on a magnetic lock and a pressure plate, both of which are child's play. Once we're in, we have 10 minutes. Find what you're looking for. They walked in through the service entrance, heads down, just 2 more invisible night workers. The restaurant was dark and silent, a ghost of its daytime self. While Silas pushed a mop bucket with painstaking ineptitude, Isabel worked on the cellar's keypad. Less than a minute later, a soft click echoed in the hallway. They were in. The air was cold and still, smelling of damp earth and fermented grapes. Isabel stood guard at the door, while Silas moved through the aisles of priceless bottles. He found the Chateau Margaux section. There were 3 bottles of the 1982 vintage, 2 in the back, 1 in the forward display position, the one that had been served to him. He took out a pocket-sized, high-intensity UV light Adrian had provided. His grandfather had been a collector of rare books, and he'd taught Silas what to look for. Old paper, old glue. They fluoresce differently under UV light than modern materials. He shined the light on the two bottles in the back. The labels glowed with a soft, even, yellowish tint, the dull, muted glow of old rag-based paper. Then he shined the light on the bottle in the front cradle. The label blazed with a brilliant bluish-white light. It was modern paper treated with chemical brighteners. It was a fake. A brilliant, perfect fake, but a fake nonetheless. He had his proof. Vane hadn't served him the real bottle. He had served him a copy, confident that no one would know the difference, and pocketed a genuine artifact worth a fortune. His guest for the night had been a co-conspirator, there to pick up the real bottle that Vane had pulled from the display. The old man's order hadn't been a threat, it had been an opportunity. Silas took out a microcamera and documented everything. The glow of the fake label, the serial numbers on the real ones. He carefully took a fiber sample from the edge of the fake label with a pair of sterile tweezers. It was more than enough. As they slipped back out of the restaurant and into the anonymity of the van, Silas felt a cold, righteous fury he hadn't experienced since he was a young man building his first company. Marcus Vane wasn't just a thief, he was a parasite, poisoning a world of beauty and history with his greed, and using a terrified, brilliant young woman as his shield. The game was over. The reckoning was about to begin, and it would not be quiet or private. It would be a public execution, held in the very temple Vane had built for his crimes. The morning sun cast long, sharp shadows across Fifth Avenue, as Silas Thorne, once again the titan of industry, stood before the panoramic windows of his office. The rumpled tweed jacket and corduroys were gone, replaced by a bespoke suit of dark charcoal wool that seemed to absorb the light, a piece of urban camouflage for the boardroom predator. He was no longer Sam, the ghost. He was Silas, the executioner. Adrian stood beside him, holding a tablet. "The FBI's art crime team is ready to move on your signal, sir. They have enough for a warrant based on the evidence Isabel and you collected. They can take Vane at his home, quietly." "No," Silas said, his voice a low growl. His eyes were fixed on the distant skyline of Tribeca. "A quiet arrest is a release. This man's currency is image, reputation, control. I'm going to strip him of all three, in public. And I need to do it carefully. Elara Vance is the hero of this story, Adrian, not us. We need to ensure she is protected and then rewarded." "I've already moved her and her grandfather to a secure residence," Adrian reported. "She believes it's a standard corporate safety protocol. She's shaken but resolute, and your other request is in motion." "Good," Silas said. "Be ready. We go at noon." At 11:55 a.m., the pre-lunch hum of the Aurelian was a symphony of clinking silver and hushed anticipation. Marcus Vane, immaculate in a silver-gray suit, was surveying his domain, his mood buoyant. The previous night's transaction had been a success, and the strange, profligate old man was a forgotten anomaly. Then the smoke glass doors swung open, and the music seemed to falter. Silas Thorne entered the restaurant. He was not alone. Flanked by Adrian and two other stern-faced individuals in dark suits who were clearly not there for lunch, he moved into the room with an aura of absolute power that silenced all conversation. Vane's practiced smile froze on his face. He knew instantly who this was, the reclusive, almost mythical owner of the building, a man more powerful than any celebrity or politician he had ever served. Vane rushed forward, his mind racing. "Mr. Thorne, what an unexpected honor. We weren't aware you were—" "I was here last night, Mr. Vane," Silas said, his voice calm and carrying through the silent room. He walked past the fawning manager and straight to the small, wobbly table by the service corridor. "Table 14. He ran a hand along its surface. "I had a meal here. It was enlightening." The blood drained from Vane's face. He stared, his brain struggling to reconcile the powerful man before him with the shabby, forgotten ghost from the night before. "You?" he stammered, a single bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Silas's gaze swept over the stunned staff and diners. It landed on Ellie, who had just emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of bread baskets. She stopped dead, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. She thought he was here for her, to expose her, to ruin her. "My office," Vane croaked, desperate to get out of the public eye. Inside the small, ostentatious office, Silas went straight to a framed photograph on the wall. Vane shaking hands with a famous art critic. "Reputation is a fragile thing, isn't it, Marcus?" Silas mused, his back to the trembling manager. "It can take a lifetime to build, and only a moment to shatter." He turned. "Like, for instance, the moment an authenticator realizes the 1982 Chateau Margaux he's been served has a label printed on modern, chemically brightened paper." Vane collapsed into his leather chair as if his bones had dissolved. I don't know what you're talking about." Adrian stepped forward, placing his tablet on the desk. He swiped through a series of images. The UV-lit fake label, the financial records linking Vane to the crime syndicate, shipping manifests for art supplies delivered to a shell corporation. "We know everything, Marcus," Adrian said, his voice flat and cold. "We know about the forgeries. We know the cellar is your showroom for swapping fakes for the real articles, which your associates then sell on the black market. We know last night's real bottle went home with the guest at the bar." He swiped to the final image, a high-resolution security still of Vane gripping Ellie's arm in the corridor, his face contorted with rage. "And we know you've been terrorizing a young woman who is 10 times the person you will ever be," Silas said, his voice dropping to a furious whisper. "You used her desperation as a weapon. You thought she was weak. You were wrong. She was in on it," Vane blubbered, his final, pathetic attempt to spread the blame. "She's the one who spotted you. She must be part of another crew." Silas held up a hand, and Adrian opened the office door. "Alara," Silas called, his voice now gentle. "Could you join us for a moment?" Shaking, Ellie entered the office, her eyes darting from Vane's pathetic, sobbing form to Silas's imposing figure. "Alara," Silas said softly, "Mr. Vane here is under the impression that you were his accomplice. Is that true?" Ellie looked at the man who had tormented her, and a fire kindled in her eyes, burning away the fear. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He is a thief. I saw him inspect the label on a bottle he knew should be real. He was checking the quality of a forgery. My grandfather taught me how to spot a fake. Mr. Vane failed in the details." "I see," Silas said. He nodded to the 2 men who had entered with him. "Gentlemen, I believe you have your confession." As the FBI agents cuffed a sputtering, incoherent Vane and led him away through the gawking dining room, a stunned silence fell over the restaurant. Silas turned to Ellie. "Last night," he said, his voice carrying through the room for all to hear, "someone in this restaurant acted with a degree of integrity and courage I have seldom witnessed. That person risked her livelihood and potentially her safety to expose a deep and insidious crime, not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do." He looked directly at her. "That person was you, Alara." Tears of pure, unadulterated relief began to stream down Ellie's face. "Your grandfather's medical debts," Silas continued, his voice softer now, for her alone, "have been paid in full. Furthermore, Thorne Industries is endowing a trust in his name at the Horological Society of New York to ensure his legacy and support future artisans. Consider it a thank you from one man who appreciates fine details to another." A sob of disbelief escaped Ellie's lips. "As for you," Silas said, "a person with your eye, your knowledge, and your character is wasted carrying plates." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I am in the process of acquiring the Belmont collection of Renaissance timepieces. It's a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, and it is rife with potential forgeries. I am in need of a head curator and authenticator. The position requires a deep understanding of craftsmanship, an obsessive eye for detail, and unimpeachable integrity. It's your job if you want it." The entire room was silent, watching this impossible real-life fairy tale unfold. A terrified waitress was being offered a new life, a new identity, not as a gift, but as a reward she had earned. "Say you'll accept," Silas urged kindly. "Yes," she whispered, the word filled with a universe of shock and dawning joy. "Yes, I accept." In the end, it wasn't the $24,000 wine or the billion-dollar corporation that defined the story. It was a small, folded note, an observation born of a grandfather's love, and the quiet, unshakable courage of a young woman who knew the difference between what is valuable and what is priceless. Elara Vance was a reminder that true masters leave their signature not in their name, but in the perfection of their work and the integrity of their character. Silas Thorne had set out looking for a soul, and in the process had begun to reclaim his own. He had learned that the heaviest ghost can be lifted, not by forgetting the past, but by building a better future, one small, perfect, authentic detail at a time.